then it happened, and it was just beyond my wildest dreams, and all the angst I had been feeling about spending that much money just completely dissipated away. It was 100% worth it.
This show is dedicated to helping you strengthen your family tree and live financially free. Welcome to the Marriage, Kids, and Money podcast, everybody. This is Andy Hill, and today we're talking about how to pay for your wedding without going into debt. With many lending companies offering convenient yet very high-interest wedding loans these days, it can be tempting to borrow money to have your ideal wedding day. After all, the average cost for a wedding, according to Debt.com, is around $35,000. Now, that is a lot of money. The unfortunate thing with borrowing is that debt follows you into your first days of your marriage, and with money fights being one of the top reasons for divorce, starting off with 5 figures of wedding debt might not be an ideal starting place for this lifelong partnership. Today, I've invited someone on the show who's not only experienced the emotional and financial hardships of debt, but she figured out how to combat it and eventually pay for her $40,000 wedding in cash. Stefanie O'Connell Rodriguez is my guest today. Stefanie is a nationally recognized millennial money expert and the author of the book, The Broke and Beautiful Life. Stefanie's work and advice has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, USA Today, Cosmopolitan, Glamour, and Oprah magazine. As a go-to money expert, Stefanie has appeared on ABC World News, CBS, Fox and Friends, Fox Business, Bloomberg, Reuters, The Dr. Oz Show, and various other print and digital media outlets. She currently lives in New York City with her brand new husband. Welcome to the show, Stefanie.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So, Stefanie, you weren't always a millennial money expert. What kind of financial struggles did you deal with before you got that moniker, I guess?
Yeah, I was far from a money expert. I was actually an actress. I majored in psychology and in drama. So I spent the first 7 years out of school as a professional musical theater actress, touring the world, touring the United States. And my, origin story with money was making very little, unsurprisingly, as an actor. And also not having any kind of consistency with my income, with my benefits, with anything. I didn't know when I was going to get paid, how I was going to get paid. I didn't have health insurance, all the things. So the really big moment for me was I got my dream job right out of college. I was on the road, on tour, and it was great. I was saving money. I was living off of the per diem that they gave us so I could bank my entire salary. Like, I was doing all the right things. But then the producers flew out and they were like, hi, it's 2008 and there's a financial crisis, so we're going to shut this down. And I come back to New York City in 2009 as an unemployed actress at the height of a financial crisis. And I have my moment of, oh my gosh, this is actually difficult. And my next job offer was for like $225 a week. And I said, well, that's completely unsustainable. I make more working at a restaurant. And I kept having those kinds of moments. And one of the big ones was when I actually had an issue with my teeth and I had to go get a dental implant, and they told me it was going to cost $2,000, and I didn't have any way to pay for it. I didn't have the money. So I just sat there and I cried. And I was like, I never, ever, ever want to feel this way again, at the mercy of my money or my lack of it. And that was a huge turning point for me to start seeking out resources in the realm of personal finance, like books, like classes, and really start building an education around money and how to make it work for me.
That's incredible. So did you have, at that moment with the dentist situation, did you have to go into debt to live this life that you had and, to keep things going?
Yeah, so I went into debt a couple of times. Nothing. I'm fortunate that I never went into a degree of debt that was hanging over me for years and years and years. But I did have those scenarios where I just didn't have the money. And so I relied on credit cards. And I was lucky enough that I had relatively good credit that I could qualify for things like 0% APR, introductory periods, and be able to pay off those debts during those times. So I was always really, really frugal and really, really like money smart about some things, but not really holistic about my approach to money. And what I learned during that period was that like you can't out frugal your way to rich. You need to know more than how to live on nothing to get ahead.
Yeah, and it sounds like it was a bit of an income problem, too, as opposed to, hey, man, I've got this outrageous life, because you said you're frugal. So what did you do to increase your income from that point to kind of improve your money situation? I understood you found some resources and books and things like that that inspired you, but what did you do to increase your income?
Yeah, you're completely right in that it was an income problem. And changing how much money I earn has completely changed my life in a way that no other money tactic has. So I can't overstate how important that was. And I started in all kinds of ways. So I was a side hustle extraordinaire, and I still am. And that meant doing everything from, being a personal assistant to babysitting, doing things to really just kind of make ends meet. And also simultaneously building out a new skill set with skills like writing that were in higher demand and could potentially lead to some more lucrative side gigs. And I started slowly freelance writing for people. And that's turned out to be kind of a way for me to pivot into a career I never anticipated, because I already had the skill set of storytelling and connecting with audiences. And it was just taking my existing skill set and bringing it to a market where there was actually demand. The thing about acting for a living is that there are 50 other people who are just as talented as you, who look exactly like you, who can do the same job for less, and they will. And it was a little bit different when I started freelance writing. This was more of an in-demand skill. There weren't that many people who could do it. I was able to harness my storytelling abilities to connect to people a little bit differently than a lot of the other writers out there. And because that was more of a unique skill, I was able to command more money. And slowly I started asking for more and more, and my clients became bigger and bigger, and so did the paychecks.
I love it. So you diversified your income from that starting point into different areas. You were babysitting, you were doing all this different stuff, and then you found something. You said, hey, I've got a skill here, and it's a higher in demand, or at least a higher pay, and then you started to invest there. Is that right?
That's correct.
Awesome. That's incredible. So let's talk about this wedding, because with these new skills and your experience being through debt, it sounds like it's something that you maybe didn't want to experience again. Is that why you wanted to pay for your wedding in cash?
I never even considered going into debt for my wedding. Like, it didn't even come into my brain as an option. And that's been true for me with debt. By and large, the debt I have accrued over my life has been generally because of medical issues, things I couldn't avoid. But when it comes to things that are discretionary, and I consider a wedding a discretionary expense, I don't even think of debt as an option. So I think that was a really clear starting point for me, that whatever we were going to do was going to have to happen within our existing means.
Excellent. And then your husband, what are his thoughts overall on, this personal finance world, and then again paying for your wedding in cash? Was that something you guys were on board with?
Yeah. So my husband is a professional stagehand, and he was always a bit of more of a spender than I was. But he was never like crazy irresponsible. And I think where our dynamic has kind of helped each other is that I think he's allowed me to see the value in actually spending my money in alignment with my values. Because if you had told me I would have spent $40,000 on a wedding, I would have said you were crazy. But actually, I have zero regrets about it. And part of that attitude comes from, being with my husband and vice versa, my husband has never really spent more than he's made, but he hasn't been very diligent about his finances. Like, he would not pay off his credit card balance in full. I don't know why. He could, but he didn't. And so, like, in that regard, I think I've had a positive influence in that, like, he automatically does that now. He automatically contributes to the 401k. And so we've had this kind of influence on one another. And I think what's more important, an open dialogue about our money since day one, that's been really beneficial.
I think that's incredible. You're describing a relationship that sounds eerily familiar to me in my marriage, as a lot of people who listen to this show know. So that's great. I'm glad you had those discussions beforehand, and you're seeing the positives of the differences, because some people don't see those positives. Some people think it as like, he's wrong, I'm right. And that's where the friction happens. And I really appreciate you seeing that as a positive and working for that middle ground. So kudos to you as you start your brand new marriage. That's super cool. So let's talk about how you saved up enough money to do this. I understand you increased your income, but let's I guess go get nitty gritty. How can somebody save up enough $40,000 to pay for a wedding?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that my current husband and I have been dating for 7 years. And when we first started dating, each of our incomes was a third of what it is today. So one of the things I tell people is that, like, if you want to have a big wedding, that's fine. And if you want it to be extravagant, that's fine. What's not fine is putting yourself in a bad financial situation to do it. So if it's a priority for you to do something that's a big blowout, extend the engagement before you overextend the budget. Now, we weren't engaged for a long time, but we dated for a very long time. And I was 32 when I got engaged. My husband was 32 when we got engaged. So what that meant was that not only had we had a lot of time to really position ourselves in our careers where we were making significantly more money than when we met at 26, it also meant that we had time to save. And the other piece of this is, like, we live in New York, which is not, very cost effective on a day-to-day basis. However, living in New York also enables us to earn a lot more money. As I said, my husband's a stagehand. He makes 6 figures and doesn't have a college degree. I work in media, so my job is really contingent on New York. So the cost of living in New York City has a net positive for us because we're able to earn a lot of money. But my point is, because we live here, we have never really had a big expense. My husband did buy a car a few years ago, but even that was like $8,000. I've never owned a car. Again, I'm like 33 years old. I've never purchased a car. I don't own a home. I haven't had anything huge that's really taken up a huge chunk of my money since I became, a full-fledged independent adult. And so because of that, and because of the increase in my income, we were really able to build up savings really slowly and steadily for about the 6 years we were together, so that by the time we were like, okay, we're going to get married, we each looked at each other and were like, okay, let's see what we have in savings. And we agreed that we'd each contribute $15,000 to our first joint savings account because we had it. We already had it saved. And we didn't know what it was for, but we knew eventually we would need that money. And we had gotten into the habit of setting money aside on a consistent basis so that when we did have a milestone goal, we'd be prepared to fund it. Now, we did start this journey with $30,000 in the bank, and that's wonderful. However, during the process of planning our wedding, we also moved. And between the moving costs and getting a new apartment and all that, we used about $10,000 of that money to fund our moving cost. So now we're about $20,000 shy of how much our wedding actually cost. So one of the other things that we really prioritized was trying to space out our vendor payments throughout the wedding planning process. So for example, we had to make a deposit on the venue about 6 months before the wedding. So we already had that money coming out of our savings, but then we went through moving and everything, and we had to rebuild our savings, and spacing out those vendor payments over time, over the 6 months between, when we really started planning and the wedding, gave us time to really aggressively rebuild our savings. And we did some things that, a financial planner might say, oh, that's not the best idea. But we paused our retirement contributions for a month because that enabled us to use money now in the moment. And like, is it the most ideal situation? No. But is it a trade-off we thought was worthwhile? Absolutely.
That's great. And, sometimes people have their parents contribute or their spouse's parents contribute. Did that happen in your situation?
So we did not want to take any money for our wedding because you know how people feel ownership of things if they contribute to them. And that was kind of an emotional situation that we didn't want to deal with, especially because my husband and I are not very traditional. We really like to do things our own way. And we knew that if we accepted money, from our parents, for example, that we would kind of be beholden to them in terms of the way they think we should do things. And that's not to say that we don't regard the values of our families in planning the process, but we really wanted this day to be about us and our values and to express that. And so that's why paying for our own wedding was a priority. That said, we did get a couple of surprises throughout the process. For example, when I went to the liquor store, I went with my parents because they have a minivan. And so we were buying all of our own liquor for the wedding. And I was like, okay, great. I'm going to use the minivan and you guys can help me carry it. And then at come checkout, I think we had a pretty hefty bill, around like $1,800. And my dad wound up paying for it. So that was a really wonderful surprise. We way overbought liquor, guys. You don't need to buy that much liquor for your wedding. My parents now have like a 3-year supply of liquor. But I think, that was a really great way to accept money for us because one, we weren't anticipating it. And then two, it was really relegated to that one thing. I think if you are going to accept assistance from your family members, if you can say, oh, you guys can pay for the band or you guys can pay for the food, then it kind of can help try to contain their input and opinions to that one singular expense rather than your entire wedding.
We'll be back to the show after a word from our sponsors. We all know we should be investing our money, but sometimes we have more questions than we have answers on where to invest our money. Well, Facet Wealth is here to help. Facet Wealth is a group of CFP professionals that are dedicated to helping you achieve your financial goals. They provide comprehensive one-on-one advice over the phone or through video conference. This way, you can get the financial support you need from the comfort of your own home. Now, you've heard me talk about the importance of working with a fiduciary, right? That's exactly what Facet Wealth provides. Fee-only CFP professionals with no commissions and no assets under management. To learn more and get a free, no-commitment 30-minute consultation with a trusted professional, go to marriagekidsandmoney.com/facetwealth. That's marriagekidsandmoney.com/facetwealth. FACETWEALTH. With Facet Wealth, you get fee-only financial advice from the comfort of your own home. One of the single best ways to protect your family is with term life insurance. This way, you're ensuring your family is financially covered if the unexpected occurs. Bestow is an excellent life insurance partner that makes this process simple and easy. They use data to remove the doctor visits and paperwork involved with the traditional life insurance process. And you can apply from anywhere in just minutes. Unlike some of their competitors, you'll get an approval response right away. Check this to-do off your list today, my friends. Get your free and convenient quote by visiting marriagekidsandmoney.com/bestow. That's marriagekidsandmoney.com/bestow. BESTOW. With Bestow, you can have peace of mind in just minutes. Thanks for taking the time to consider our sponsors, everybody. Let's jump back into the show. You set this budget. You say, "Hey, we're going to spend $40,000 on this wedding." And as things happen with events, I work in events, so I know that you set the budget, and then things change. Like things change during the process. So, how did you experience this at all? Were there things that changed during the weeks that led up to it, or things that added up to higher than 40 or less than 40? How did that go?
Oh yeah. I mean, I I had not really come up with like the most solid number about like what we will or won't spend. I just was like, we won't go into debt, and that's like my line. But we originally had $30,000 in the bank, and the wedding wound up costing 40. So we had to continue contributing to the vendors over time and shifting money around. And in terms of like where those surprise expenses came from, there was just there was so much of it. Like there's so much we didn't do, and yet our wedding still cost $40,000. And a lot of that was it's an extra $2 per person for a caterer to cut the cake that I'm providing, right? So like this is the thing about wedding planning. When I hear the average numbers, for the last 10 years I've been commenting on the cost of weddings about how ridiculous it is. But then when you go to actually sit down and do it, you're like, well, what am I going to do? I'm already invested this heavily. The caterer's there. I want to bring my cake. I'm bringing it myself. Am I not going to serve the cake that I'm bringing myself because they're going to charge me a fee? No, I'm gonna pay the extra $500. And this happened to me with ice too. Like they were like, oh, it's an extra $5 per person for us to provide ice. And I was livid. So I was like, no, forget that. I'm going to go shopping around the Upper East Side where my wedding was and find a grocery store to deliver ice. Well, all in all, that saved me about $30. And it took me like 2 hours of my time and like stress that was completely not worthwhile. So I think that was one of the big surprises with the planning process, was that the cost of my time and energy wound up being more valuable than the dollar amount. And I think that's different for every person. But in my case, it wound up making more sense to spend extra money to make things easier than it was to DIY more.
So just like everyone's budget, there are certain things that somebody will spend more on that bring them value, and things that they spend less on that don't bring them a lot of value. So what in your wedding did you feel good about spending a good amount of money on, and what things didn't you spend a lot of money on that maybe a typical wedding would have had?
Yeah, so one of the things we spent a lot on was food, which is not surprising. But in addition to the wedding meal itself, we wound up serving and catering a meal on Friday evening before the wedding, Saturday morning, Saturday lunch before the wedding, Saturday evening after the wedding, and Sunday brunch following the wedding. And one of the reasons we did that was because we got married in New York City. It's a little bit tricky because a lot of our friends and family live in the area. It's a little tricky to create kind of like a community feeling in a big city. And we really wanted that. That was a priority for us. We've been to a lot of weddings that were a weekend away somewhere in the country, and everyone spends time together and people fly in, and, you really get a sense of the families coming together, the communities being built, and the relationship being built. And we know that within a 5-hour window of a formal wedding, that wasn't going to be able to happen. So we wanted to create an atmosphere, but by serving many, many meals and by booking this penthouse suite at this hotel with a private terrace, which was also very expensive, where everyone could come and aggregate before the wedding, after the wedding, and like all weekend long, to create that community feeling. That was a priority for us, and it was expensive to feed and basically house everyone, but it was so worthwhile because that was the biggest value for us of the wedding. I would say in terms of what people maybe typically spend money on that we didn't spend any money on, I did not have any bridesmaids. So that really saved a lot in terms of not just costs for me of, paying for friends to get their hair and makeup done, but also for them of having to maybe buy a dress or anything specific. I still spent the day with my girlfriends. We took photos together. We had a wonderful time. I just didn't think that was an extra necessary cost. I saved a lot on flowers. Speaking of flowers, I went to the New York City Flower District the day before the wedding, picked up about $300 worth of wholesale flowers, and we put some bouquets together. I know people spend thousands of dollars on flowers. We had almost no decor. We were in a beautiful venue that in and of itself, overlooked Central Park on one side, overlooked the Metropolitan Museum of Art on the other side. We didn't really feel there was a need to add anything to it. We didn't have any favors. Our favor was like 6 meals. So It was just a lot of weighing, what you said, what's a priority for us versus what isn't.
I love that. That's great. That's very cool. So you said, I think a couple of years ago, you would look at spending $40,000 at a wedding and roll your eyes and say that's ridiculous. So you've now had your wedding and you spent $40,000 on it. Was it everything you'd hoped for?
It was so much better than anything I hoped for, which is wild to say. People keep asking me how it was. And I think it's because I had so few expectations of my wedding. Maybe that's a bad thing to say, but, it's not something I fantasized a lot about growing up. And then, when I was planning it, it was all about the logistics. But then it happened, and it was just beyond my wildest dreams, and all the angst I had been feeling about spending that much money just completely dissipated away. It was 100% worth it.
That's awesome. If you had to think about one specific thing from your wedding that you just loved the most, that you spent money on, what would it have been?
Oh man, it's gotta be the penthouse hotel suite we booked. There was a huge private terrace. I mean, like a capacity for like 50 people on this private terrace overlooking Central Park. We had absolutely stunning weather. We had people out there all weekend. And the night before my wedding, after everybody left, my now husband and I sat out there chatting with each other, and then we were rehearsing our first dance outside on this private terrace overlooking Manhattan, and it was such a special moment. And that room was very expensive, but it was so worthwhile for those moments.
Sounds like an epic party. Way to go. That's great. That's awesome. So I understand one other thing that you didn't spend a lot of money on was the engagement ring. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's correct. We spent $0 on an engagement ring.
So why is that? Why did you guys choose to do that?
Yeah, well, actually, my fiance did give me an engagement ring. But I as soon as he proposed, I was like, yeah, I'll marry you. But how do you feel about me wearing this ring? And the reason I did that was because I'm not big on jewelry to begin with. It's not really a value of mine in a way that I guess food is or spending time with my friends and family. And two, for me, like an engagement ring is redundant. I do have a wedding ring. So I figured, if I'm going to get a ring in a year when we get married, I don't think it's really necessary that you spent all this money on an engagement ring. And how would you feel if we returned it and then used that money to fund our wedding and whatever other goals that we have as a couple as we're moving forward into this marriage? And that was something that my fiance at the time, now husband, was totally on board with. And one of the really interesting things we did during that conversation was I, in my typical personal finance nerd fashion, was like, so, what are all your goals for the next 5 years? Because I was like, the thing people do when they get married is, especially when it comes to money, is like all roads lead to the wedding, as if the wedding is the final destination rather than what it really is, which is the start of your marriage. And so I really wanted to start thinking about what our wedding and engagement meant within the context of the rest of our lives rather than as a destination. And if we're going to spend a lot of money right now, whether it's on our ring or on our wedding, I understood that would mean less money for things that we might want to do in a year or 2 years or 3 years. So before we made any money decisions, I really wanted to think about what we wanted to do in the next, 5 or so years that would otherwise make demands on our money. Let's say buying a house. If we wanted to buy a house right away, we might not want to spend $40,000 on a wedding. And had that been a priority in either of our 5-year timeframes, then yeah, we probably would have spent less. But because we went through that exercise of kind of like mapping out exactly some of the things we wanted to do in the next few years, we were much better able to prioritize our wedding and engagement and all that finances within the context of the rest of our marriage.
I love that. How did you bring that up? Did he propose and he showed you the ring and then you said, well, let's fill out this form here that I have that talks about the next 5 to 10 years. When did you bring it up?
Okay, so immediately I was like, okay, I was very much in shock. I don't know why, as someone who has had been dating for 6 years, I was in shock that my fiance proposed, but I was. And one of the things I was like, oh my gosh, you got a ring. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, what do you think if like we turn it in and then like use the money to pay for the wedding? I said it immediately. And I think I get a pass a little bit because my fiance knows what I do. But I also think I get a pass because like I've established a pattern of behavior about being mindful about money from the first time we went out. The first time he asked me out, I was like, yeah, I'll go somewhere with you, but I'm on a budget, so it's got to be somewhere cheap. So I think having talked about everything in our lives this way since the first time we went out together, my fiance isn't like totally put off or caught off guard when I do something as unromantic as suggesting that he return the engagement ring for money.
It's because he knows in 6 years he knows you, right? I mean, so yeah. He probably heard you say that, and he's like, yeah, that sounds about right.
Sounds about right. Exactly.
So you talked about the next 5 to 10 years. Are there any other high ticket items that you guys are saving up for in the future? You talked about potential house. What's exciting for you now?
You know, it's so funny because as I mentioned, we're a little bit non-traditional, but it's funny because we're in our mid-30s now, and we really don't have anything major on our horizon. What we're really committed to is building our careers and really enjoying the lifestyle we have. Like I said, we live in New York. We love to travel, and though we don't have a very specific goal, like we're paying for a $40,000 wedding, we are still saving as though we do, because like this wedding, we imagine something's going to come up that's probably pretty big ticket in the future within the next 5 to 10 years. And we might not anticipate exactly when that's going to happen, but we know it's not a matter of if, but when. And because of that, we just have a practice of setting money aside and rebuilding our savings all the time. And because of that, it allows us to be more prepared when those big milestone moments come up, so that, for example, when we do get engaged, we had each $15,000 to put in.
Got it. So savings and investing, that word can sometimes get commingled. Where are you physically putting this money that you're planning for the future?
So it depends. For the money that we are thinking of as 10 years plus out, we invest that money. So we have retirement investments. So that's our 60 plus money. And my husband he's part of a union. They have great benefits, and he maxes those out at work. I have a SEP IRA since I'm self-employed, and I make use of that. And that's our retirement investments. Then we have regular taxable investment accounts, and those are for our savings goals that might be 10 years plus down the line. And then what's a priority for us right now is really rebuilding that, what we call life money. We have the emergency fund, we have the long-term savings, we have the long-term investments, but we got a lot of life we want to live in between. And while we don't know exactly what we're going to do with that life right now, we don't have a huge milestone on the horizon, we do know that there are things that we like to do that are likely going to be pretty expensive. So we like to have that money accessible but growing. And so for us, that looks like a high yield online savings account. We were getting 2% interest on our savings
I know.
for
what's
the
up,
short
Fed?
term, but I don't know if that's going to happen anymore.
Right.
But we don't leave that money sitting in a checking account. We don't leave that money, sitting somewhere where we're going to access it too easily or where it's not going to grow.
Got it. Well, thank you for getting specific with us. Sometimes that helps people to know the exact details. So there's somebody listening right now that's either thinking of getting married or they're engaged and they want to have a debt-free wedding so they don't have to think about this debt on the first days of their marriage. What is one piece of advice that you would leave with them today?
I would really recommend the 5-year exercise of really not just thinking about what you want your wedding to look like, but what you want the next 5 years of your marriage to look like, or 10 years of your marriage to look like, and have your wedding be part of that. And then once you see your wedding within the context of all the other goals you have with your spouse, then you can better decide how to allocate resources for it.
I love it. Starting with the why in the beginning instead of how we're going to do it. I love it. Very cool. So, Stefanie, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today about this big day of yours and how you did it in a debt-free fashion. Where's the best place people can find your book and then connect with you?
Yeah, my book, The Broke and Beautiful Life, is on Amazon. If you Google it, you'll find it. And I'm also very active on Instagram for any of the Instagram users out there at Stefanie O'Connell.
Excellent. Stefanie, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
What a way to start your marriage. That is so cool. That's a partnership with goals, a vision, and a bright financial future ahead. Here are my top 3 takeaways from my conversation with Stefanie O'Connell Rodriguez. Number 1, set a vision for the next 5 years. I so appreciated when Stefanie talked about spending more time on planning your future after the wedding than the wedding itself. Knowing that this event is only one day and your marriage is, thousands of days? What's more important, right? Number 2, talk about a wedding budget beforehand. Work with your spouse to set an overall budget for the wedding costs. This can help you have important conversations about how you're going to achieve the difficult task of saving up for the wedding. These conversations can be an excellent starting point for a marriage focused on compromise, partnership, and really understanding each other's values. Number 3, invest in what's most important to both of you. If fancy flowers and decor is less important to you than plentiful food and an awesome wedding venue, then dial down the budget on the flowers and decor and amplify the budget on the food and the venue. This is your day. Choose what's most important to you and your spouse. Stefanie, thank you so much for connecting today and sharing your debt-free wedding success. I wish you and your husband the happiest of days to come. As a quick reminder, everybody, this show is for entertainment purposes only. Be sure to seek out a professional for your specific financial situation. Before we go for the day, I'd like to ask you to do any one of these 3 things to support this show. Number 1, join the Marriage, Kids, and Money community. This is a bi-weekly email that I'm sending out that gives you updates on upcoming meetups and financial tips and all sorts of other great information. You can join up at marriagekidsandmoney.com/playbook. And for doing so, I'll give you my free ebook, The Young Family Wealth Playbook. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast in your favorite podcast player. And then the last thing, number 3, share this episode with a friend who's planning their wedding like Stefanie and looking for some money inspiration. You can find this show and all the links and resources mentioned at marriagekidsandmoney.com/session 154. That's session 154. And if you are new to this show, thanks for checking it out, by the way. I would highly recommend you check out session 116, the 10 Steps to Young Family Wealth and Happiness. You can find that at marriagekidsandmoney.com/session 116. It is a great place to start. In the spirit of growth and inspiration, I'm going to end the show with a quote today from the Dalai Lama. Let us reflect on what is truly of value in life, what gives meaning to our lives, and set priorities on the basis of that. Your priorities and your actions define your character, my friends. Carpe diem.